Starting. I hope.
I'm nervous.
It says recording.
Oh, good.
Okay. Whew. And I still have a slide up. Okay. Yay. So, at any rate, I loved getting a chance to meet Celine through FOBA and also at the Newport Book Arts Conference. We had a class together. And yeah, I will give you my traditional introduction that I do it when I'm in a workshop, or I did for many years. I don't anymore, but for many years, and probably when I met Jean, I see she's here. I say something like, "Hi, I'm Jeri Oswalt. I'm really an embroiderer. I'm not really a book artist, even though I've been taking classes and working with book arts for the last 20 years. I just couldn't quite convince myself that it counted. I have since been told that I can't do that anymore. So I am not doing that now. We're going to do a little bit of history. We're going to spend just a few slides on a little bit of history of embroidery and book arts, because this is not a new thing. I'm going to give you a little bit of my path. Mostly, though, I want to walk you through some of the pieces that I've created and the lessons I've learned doing those pieces. And I'm hoping you will type in the chat if I'm not giving you what you need. I don't know how much really you want to know about the embroidery and how much you want to know about the process, or if you'd rather know about content, why I stitched the things I stitched. But you'll help me, through the chat. Celine is going to be monitoring that, and Celine will give me clues if I need to be telling you more about something or another. Once we walk through some of my pieces, I'm going to share with you two websites that I think are super helpful if you are interested in embroidery, whether you're new to it or whether you've been doing it forever. And I also want to just introduce you very quickly to three artists that I've been following lately that I think are interesting. So hopefully out of all of this, give me just a little wave. I can't see all of you because lots of cameras are off. You get extra points if your camera's on. Give me a little wave if you've done some embroidery in your work. Oh, I see some hands waving. Excellent, excellent. So my goal is to give you, I'm hoping everybody walks away with at least one or two things that they were like, oh, I didn't know about that. Even if you've been an embroiderer for a long time. There are lots of fiber people involved in book arts and lots of book arts people involved in fiber. So I wouldn't be surprised. So as I said, it's not a new thing. This is a prayer book that was embroidered by Princess Elizabeth, the one who became Queen Elizabeth I in 1545. She embroidered it for her stepmother. 100 years later, we saw this book that was done. It's one of the Psalms for the Stationers Guild. 100 years later, this is all metalwork, primarily metalwork. In its time, this would have been silver, and it would have been quite dazzling. It's silk threads and metal threads on canvas. It's currently at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. But I really just want to show you another example. Embroidery in book arts is not a new thing. Now, then it got really quiet for a while. 17th century, people weren't all that into it. 1635, we saw that. But then there was a gap. And we saw a resurgence very late in the 18th century. So Victorian era, if you think about it, there was lots of decorative items, lots of layers of textiles, lots of, right? So a couple things happened sort of simultaneously during that time. People liked a lot of stuff. Their house, they did not do like sleek. Nobody was into minimalism. Let's put it that way. So we saw a resurgence of just decorative items. Bibliomania was coined and became very fashionable for wealthy gentlemen, and I do say gentlemen, to have very extravagant libraries. I mean, sometimes to ridiculous proportions. And one of the ways to make your library fancier than somebody else's library was to have the book covers embroidered or tooled or, beautiful covers. So we'll see beautiful books from that period. For women, it was an interesting thing because it was, for some women, it was an entree to literature. It wasn't considered, important for women to read or study or be involved in literature, but it was acceptable to read the book you were going to embroider the cover for. So it was an entree into literature for many women, or at least some women. We also saw the arts and crafts movement hit about that time. And so a much more focus on not just beautiful things, but who's making them and how are they making them, and the idea of handcraft. So I know the Puget Sound Book Arts Guild, I may not have that quite right. I understand that you had a professor do a talk on Mae Morris a few years ago, and I'm a little jealous that I missed that. She was the daughter of William Morris, famously of the "have nothing in your home that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful." I think that's a pretty famous quote. And so she had done this book cover that you're seeing in the picture here. Now, in my world, when we look back at where things began, this was one of the first boxes I was ever given. We fast forward to 1968. My grandma comes to visit, very unusual occurrence, and she brought me this box, and I was thrilled to have my own sewing box. And I opened it up, and it was empty. And I learned two lessons with this sewing box that have stuck with me for a very long time. One, if you're giving somebody a box, you need to put something in it. If you're making a box, you need to put something in it. It doesn't have to be something big and huge, but there has to be some little aha when you open the box. Now, sometimes that's a wrapped chocolate. I have made boxes that you don't necessarily open and they have bells inside. I've made something, sometimes it's just a little extra bit of embroidery on on the bottom of the box, but you want there to be a little treat when you open the box, or else it's a little disappointing. And I think the fancier the box is, the more disappointing it is, because you kind of have this big buildup that kind of falls flat. Now, also, that was lesson one. We always want to have some little surprise in the inside of the box. Lesson two is that my mother was very smart, because think about this. It's getting ready for dinner time. I, of course, am like, Mom, I need a project. I need a sewing project because I have an empty box. I need a sewing project. And she's trying to get dinner on the table. She has her mother-in-law visiting, all this. So she reaches into the linen closet, grabs the tangled wad of embroidery thread, and says, "Here, untangle this. You can roll them up in little balls and put them in your box, and you will have a project." And I thought that was, now looking back, it's like, man, what a fast little project to come up with. But it also created a deep and abiding love of thread. The night I had fractured my wrist quite badly. You can see my scar and everything. And the night before surgery, I still ordered the whole line of eco-dyed wool thread from DMC because I knew I would need to pet thread over the next couple of weeks, even though I cannot stitch for probably 6 months. I love thread. So it's really my happy place. Next, we got into some of my good fortune is that I have been able to have both formal and informal education. So I had a great teacher in high school who we batiqued and we critiqued and we stamped and we discharged. In college, I have a degree in clothing, textiles, and related arts. I studied some great stuff. I had historic costume, textile science, clothing and culture. So really interesting, really not helpful in terms of how to be an embroiderer. I'm still glad I did it. Then I went out in the world. I sold textiles to hospitals. I did a fashion lady stint at a fairly large, well-known store that was based out of Seattle. And then I decided that, I got married and I discovered that people actually sit at little tables and drink coffee on Saturday morning, like outside. They're like being leisurely. And I didn't know that people even did that. So I suddenly thought, gee, it might be nice to have kind of normal hours and get a day off every week. And that would be kind of cool. And be able to maybe afford to buy the clothes I'm selling other people. So I started looking into it. I ended up getting a master's degree in HR that was very specifically focused on how do I help people do their best work. And I'm hoping after a couple decades, as I've moved as I've retired from that career, that I still have brought that with me into the world of makers. How do I help makers do their best work? And that is really kind of core to who I am. I think of myself as an artisan because of the teaching piece just as much as I do an artist. So I moved on from, well, I also had the opportunity to do some informal learning. And I think that we sometimes skip over that part. The box you see here, this is a 17th century, they called it a casket. And typically they're done in stump work, which is a raised, kind of a raised three-dimensional embroidery. This particular one happens to be at the Met in New York. But I ran into them, oh, 30 years ago or so at the Victorian Albert in London. And I was kind of obsessed with these boxes. I didn't want to make anything that looked like them because honestly, historic textiles aren't my thing, but the idea of embroidered boxes really clicked in. And I thought about them a lot for a long time. You'll notice this kind of funny picture off to the right or off down in the corner that looks like a room. So I had the opportunity a few years ago. We spent 2 months living in New York City, and I wanted to go see the embroidered caskets that they had at the Met. Well, they aren't on exhibit anymore because they're really, they're 17th century. They're really fragile. They're really not easy to access anymore like they used to be. So I had to submit a request, and I thought, I asked them if I could come and see these boxes. My only regret is that I didn't do it like the first day I arrived in New York, but I kind of did they're never going to, who am I to ask for these things? Well, it turns out that I was apparently a perfectly normal person to ask for it. This room, they brought out all of their collection. They set them out on this table. I got to be in this room with these boxes, just me, and you'll see up in the corner of the picture, I don't know if you can see that on your screen. If you look at the box picture up in the corner, you see somebody's elbow. She was in the room to make sure I didn't lose control and start touching the boxes. But otherwise, I got to look as close as I wanted. I could take as many pictures as I wanted. I got to spend 2 hours with them. The lesson of that, and the reason I say, okay, I'm bragging just a little tiny bit, but mostly I'm telling you about it because it's really important to ask. It's really important to ask if you can see things that aren't on exhibit. That second book I showed you is currently at the Met. It's currently not on exhibit. But boy, I hope if you know you're going, plan ahead because you've got to fill out the form and you've got to get permission. They've got to make sure you're not going to try to steal it or something. But there are a lot of opportunities that if you ask, people will show you amazing textiles, amazing things. And this is one of those opportunities that I feel really lucky that I've had. If you are interested in boxes like this, Thistle Threads is a website that she does coursework on it. She teaches you how to make them. They actually use a process that's much more like book artists than embroiders, where you actually are, doing your wheat paste and adhering the embroidered panels to the wood box. It's a much, much more so than what embroiders typically would do. I'll explain what they would do later. So I then went to, so while I was doing that whole master's degree thing, I ended up one day in the library at Portland State studying employment law, hating every minute of it, and thinking that if I ever survive this course and get this degree, I'm then going to study something that I want to study just for me. And so I did. I ended up earning level 3 certificates in embroidery and design from London City and Guilds. I was very fortunate that Gail Harker was able to come to Whidbey Island, and I could do my coursework there as opposed to living in London for multiple years. So I spent about 7 years off and on working on these degrees, and this happens to be one of my final projects. Not a box or a book. I didn't actually make any boxes while I was in the class, but it became important because I had to have documentation of every single thing I made there. And guess what works best to do that? Books. So I started learning how to make books to support the work I was doing in my embroidery program. And I could not stop thinking about those embroidered boxes at the V&A. They just were stuck in the back of my mind. So I was really lucky. I was working 4/10, so I had Fridays off. And Marilyn Zornato at the Sadly, no longer. Oregon College of Art and Craft was teaching a class on Fridays on making boxes and portfolios. And of course, she snuck some books in. This is my very first box I ever made. Hers were, really the class was about paper. I learned a lot about paper, but of course, it's mine. So I had to make it out of fabric and I had to embroider on it because otherwise it wouldn't be mine. So this is my first little clamshell box. Was quite proud of myself. But after that, I really just was kind of faking my way along. I belonged to a small group called Stitch, and we exhibited and studied together. They were all graduates of City and Guilds at different times and did very different work. Our work didn't look alike at all. But here I was pretty much just making an embroidery, making a box, and sort of gluing them together, sticking them together, not with a great deal of finesse, I might add. But you know. Now, if you talk to my husband and he knows that you have any interest in book arts, he's going to tell you that I sold this book to the Met. I did not sell this box to the Met. Let me be very clear. However, while I was working on getting to see those boxes, the librarian said, well, do you have any pictures of your work? And I said, oh, well, yeah. And I sent her a few. And a few days later, I got an email from the archivist at the Met who said, I would really love to talk with you. Would you like to come view this exhibit before the museum opens? And of course, I said yes. She asked about buying this box. I kind of, oh yeah. And then I got home and I got an email and she's like, no, I really want to buy the box. So I did actually sell it to the archivist at the Met, but I did not sell it to the Met. I want to be really clear about that. The next I really don't to this day know how I found this class by Deborah Glantz. It was in her living room. She made soup for us at lunch. It was very lovely. She is very much about paper, but she makes a kind of specific sort of box. And the revelation when I took her course, it was a day. It was a really pleasant day. And it's all paper, all about paper. The paper assembly is her business. She used to own Renaissance papers. You may have seen the papers that she sold for many years. But what really was the big deal is that she had shelves in her studio that had purchased trays on them, that had just boxes on them. She was not making every single box herself. And that was like, wow, my work can now be giftable. Because I would want to make a gift for somebody and I'd be like, I'd really like to make them something, but I just don't really know how to do that. And you can imagine the look my husband gave me after all the years and dollars that I'd spent invested in learning how to make stuff, that he's like, what do you mean you don't know how to make? Well, I don't want to spend 6 months embroidering something for just a little gift. I need to find something the right scale. And this kind of became the right scale. And it also made it a lot easier to experiment because I could play around more. I wasn't having to start from scratch completely. That was also the gift of not thinking I was a book artist, is I don't have to be proper about it because I'm not really a book artist. I don't have to do it right. Now this is the exact same structure and I think it's a little easier to see in this picture. This one is slightly less giftable because it has a lot more embroidery on it. So a little more time consuming. I'm told that you're interested in content ideas, why did I put little starfish all over this? Is this true? I'm looking to see if I see any heads nod. Maybe, kind of. Okay, thank you, Lynn, for at least giving me a maybe. So I was in Hawaii and I wanted to make French, or so I was trying to make something that would be pretty but would also kind of speak to some of the environmental challenges we were seeing. And so that's why this is all kind of a seascape. There's a little prose written on this kind of seaweed tassel. Remember, you don't want to have an empty box, right? So when you lift up the lid on this box, you see this tassel of silk ribbons that are kind of seaweed-ish that come down. And on those ribbons, it says, is pretty too dangerous in its disguise. It seems churlish to mention the missing leg or extra eye in a place of such beauty. And if you actually look at the embroidery, you'll notice that some of the starfish are missing legs. There's a fish, it's hard to see, but there's a fish that's swimming in the wrong direction. All the rest of them are going one way and it's going the opposite way, just to kind of try to hint at this idea that just because it's pretty doesn't mean it's all okay, doesn't mean everything's as it should be. Now, this is the same structure. It was on the poster next to Margot Klaas's work. So that was when I decided, that was when they told me I couldn't say I wasn't a book artist anymore, because I was teaching a class at Newport. It was a fun class to teach. And we did a little less embroidery on this. But in terms of where this design came from, I was sitting at my physical therapist's office. There was a postcard of that had nothing to do with art at all, but there was a photograph of the inside of a poppy on it. And that inspired the embroidery you see on this, on the top, and then the fabric around the box is kind of poppy-ish. It is bullion knots, fly stitches with very long legs, a little satin stitch in the center. That is primarily turkey work and French knots. And the turkey work is like you're making a loop stitch and then cutting it real close so it feels like velvet. That's basically the idea. Now, you saw the first Moss Box 1. This is Moss Box 2. I think my box making skills had improved by this time. Instead of just slapping it on, gluing the top on, I sewed it to a piece of pre-made book cloth. And then that got wrapped around bookboard in the traditional way that same way you would do paper. And it became, to me, a little bit more a part of the box than just stuck on. I do kind of like my original embroidery better, but I think the box structure is much better on this one. By the way, this has been juried into the International Quilt and Fiber Festival in Everett, October. I think it's 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Somebody else may know the answer to that. It's that weekend, whatever that weekend is. I would encourage you to go. There were some great mixed media pieces last year that were clever and interesting, and that included books that people had made. Now, in case you're wondering, so how does this moss get made? And I do love that when I Google this image, it tells me it's moss on a moss growing on a box, which I really appreciate that it thinks it really is. So this is a piece of really cheap felt. It can't be the pop bottle kind because the pop bottle kind won't melt, but basically cheap craft felt. I took a piece of fusible web, painted it with Lumiere acrylic paints, metallic paints, and fused them together, fused the web to the felt, used my heat gun to distress it, and then I carried it around for about a year, stitching on it wherever I went. Fun to stitch on moss in a desert, in Hawaii, and in places where people come up and want to know what the heck you're doing. So it was a fun travel piece for a few years. Currently, it holds a poem by the poet Janice Lull about moss, which is quite lovely, and it's all lined in green suede. Yeah, so is that too much information on the embroidery or not enough? It's okay? Okay, good.
Perfect.
So, yes. Oh, so this next box, some of you have seen this before. It's been at Newport, it's been a few places, but this piece was a collaboration. It was the first real collaboration I'd done. We had an exhibit in January 21st. The date is embedded in my brain. At the Oregon Garden. And so the garden theme made sense. I was looking at a paper model of this box for a long time, kind of knowing what I wanted to do, but really not being able to get myself started. And all of a sudden it's August, January, sounds like a long way away, but in fact it's not. It's creeping up. And I finally just came to the fact that I just felt like this box was beyond me. So I pulled out my participant list from one of the conferences I'd been to, the one you got in the welcome packet. And I emailed Mo Snyder and said, hey, are you interested in collaborating with me? And fortunately, she said, yes, I would love to. And it was a really interesting lesson. And it becomes, the biggest lesson was test everything, test everything, sample everything, and then send samples to your partner so they can tell you if in fact it works for their part, not just for your part. You also have to allow time for the postal service. She lives on the Oregon coast. We saw each other once at the beginning of this project and not again until it was on exhibit. We definitely consider the postal service to be a part of this project. The fabric that you see on the outside of this box, it's called a top secret box because why would you have to have a lid on a garden unless it's containing plants that don't really exist in nature and you don't want to have them escape? So it was an opportunity to have 4 seasons. This outside is pretty realistic because it's the disguise. And it is stitched on painted linen twill, which is fabulous material to work with. It's not it's not super easy to find. It's findable, but it's not super easy to find. It is about $40 a yard. So you're a little cautious with what you're doing with it, but it's lovely to stitch on. And Mo gave it a thumbs up for making the box as well. The inside of the box, because we don't want a box to be empty, are the other 3 seasons. And so keep in mind, this is getting mailed back and forth. We started in the fall. January 21st is approaching rapidly. I often was like, I have got to fill this tray like today. I mean, I have to do it. There is no time to pause. It has to like, okay, we finished spring. We're moving on to summer. What's happening in summer? I use Pinterest. I have notebooks of stitch samples from my studies. I was like, I had tried to come up with a couple things that would be consistent for each season. So you'll see these little branches with just a little straight stitches around them. Those show up in each season. But otherwise, it was really freeing because these aren't real plants. So I could make little tassel flowers that were just really fun, or lots of French knots, or some kind of wackadoodle things. I really wanted a good bug in there. And so the story with Herman, who is the little insect, he was trying to fly from one garden to the other and the box got closed on him. So I didn't want it to look gruesome. I didn't want it to be like a blood smear. But I also didn't want it to look like I didn't know how to make a bug. There's a little pride in there too. So I think he came out quite well, but he was a little challenging. So that box was really, really something I enjoyed making. It's been quite successful. The green fabric is just right off the bolt, nothing special, nothing done to it. It's basically, it's slightly lighter weight than quilter's cotton, but not by much. Have you ever had a project that just had a black cloud over it and you're just like, why am I torturing myself? I love this panel, and it is now just a panel because there have been many traumas with it, but it's important content to me. I made this box for the same exhibit, the Oregon Garden. So I would mail things off to Mo, and then I would pull this out and stitch frantically until she mailed me back the next piece for me to work on. So it was and they both had to be done by January 21st. This piece was a tribute to my dad. I called it the Inspector's Box. He managed the plant division for the Department of Agriculture. And so this is a little bit of his career history. And I love the content of it. My parents grew strawberries, so there had to be some strawberries, some Sunbrook strawberries. He always had a gorgeous clematis that I could never get to bloom, so it had to be there. Jackson Perkin roses, Swan Island dahlias, Shriners irises are big national companies that were clients of his, that he worked with and had wonderful stories about. I have just completely lost the name of my moth. Well, the Japanese beetle and this particular moth that I made sure looked exactly like it should, the gypsy moth. My dad had a real battle with both of them for much of his career, trying to get them out of Oregon forests because they were wreaking havoc in our plant world. And so they had to be there too. There's a funny little bug at the very top. Do you notice him on top of and that doesn't look like anything, doesn't look like it's even real. Particularly when I was in college or high school, I'd come home from working late And like any teenager, I'd open the refrigerator and there would be some little specimen bag with some weird, creepy, crawly thing because he didn't have time to get back to the lab that day. So that's a real memory. That's a little bug for me because that's one of my main memories. When I talked about testing, so the studio was supposed to be done, studio was being renovated, supposed to be done before Thanksgiving. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I'm in my kitchen looking at the ceiling going, I have no ceiling in my kitchen because they were putting water pipes in the studio that didn't work. And so I have 22 people coming and my studio is the dining room. And it was a little bit of a panic. So my contractor actually came and moved my studio out and then came and moved it back in. The night I was frantically trying to get this done, I ran out of my favorite fusible. And so I used something else that I had not tested. And I fused it to the paper, fused it to the board, and it started bubbling up. The linen just did not attach. I had to go to work the next day and it was due like the day after that. So I was I ended up peeling it all apart, basically destroying the box. Basically, there's still paper attached to the back of this panel. I did it like an embroiderer would do it, which is a little layer of padding on the board. Then you pin it all the way around. You wrap it and you're lacing it, which means you're running a thread vertically up and down and then horizontally up and down. And then it got inset onto the lid of a new box. So I made an indentation that it could fit into. We had a lovely exhibit. I met people who actually knew my dad and knew his work. It was very cool. It was very successful. I was very happy. The box did not even make it all the way home before it got smashed and broken. So I just decided the box was not meant to be, and the panel is, and I just continue to enjoy the panel. It doesn't get out much because it's kind of specific. So I think you guys might be the first time besides the Oregon Garden Show, might be the first time it's been seen in a while. But the big lesson there is make sure you've got your materials and keep going. Just keep going. I don't know about you, but I pretty much hate every serious piece I've ever done halfway through. I'm always sure it's like, ugh, this is the ugliest thing ever. And then if I keep going, I find my way back to it. This piece was all about my dad. The next piece, it's pretty common for me to make a piece based on a technique I want. Like I'll find a technique I want to learn or a piece of embroidery I want to make. Or I'll find a piece of fabric or thread, or there's some kind of material that I can't resist. I love it if I have a theme, but I don't always have a theme. There isn't always like an exhibit, somebody saying, oh, hey, make something for our environmental awareness exhibit or something. This little bird, I made in a workshop with Becky Hogg. She is a wonderful embroidery teacher. She teaches primarily for the Royal School of Needlework in England, and she based this design on William Morris's Strawberry Thief, and it is metal embroidery. So if you look closely, you'll see all these little little vertical lines. That's basically a copper wire that's spiraled and it's all covered in silk. So these are different kinds of metal threads covered in silk. Kind of tricky to find these days, but they're still a few people making them, fortunately. So most of this is metal work. It was a technique I've really been wanting to expand my skills in. And I ended up with this lovely little bird who I really like and who was honestly quite expensive to make. And I was trying to think about what do I do with him now? And I got thinking, and it's like, well, I like the idea of like an easel or something because I don't really want him to just get smushed, right? I don't want a lot of stuff landing on top of him. Didn't really want to put him on a book cover that was going to get put in a bookcase. So I thought about many years before, I'm thinking like 2008 maybe, I took a class from Patty Grass at the Newport Paper and Book Arts Festival or whatever. I'm maybe not saying it right. And we made this little box that the lid lifted up and had made like a little easel. It was a little different shape, little different, but I thought, I bet I can adapt that. And I went to my file box and I opened it up and I pulled out the directions. I was so proud of myself that I could actually find them again, and was able to adapt it to this. And I sized it to this size One, because it was the right proportion for the bird, but also because I had two little books on my bookshelf that were from the V&A on William Morris fabric prints, textiles. So I thought, what a perfect little fit. So while I had a panel where everything went wrong, I would say this one everything went right, and I got to enjoy that part of the process too. Yes, and I guess the lesson is hang on to the handouts from the classes you took years ago because you just don't know what you're going to want to make later. That's what I got from it. Now, I do also occasionally make books. And in fact, prior to messing up my wrist, I was on course to make a book a month, at least a book a month this year. Looking at these two books, and this is where you might call out if you want to have your microphone on. Can you tell me which book do you think has a new home and which book is on my lessons learned shelf in my studio? So which one do you think, that's two questions, right? So which one do you think has a new home? The pink one or the blue one?
Blue.
You think the blue one has a new home?
Yep.
Do you all agree?
I think pink.
Okay, I see some heads shaking. I see pink. I see votes for blue and I see votes for pink. So the pink one is Kona cotton, embroidered first, then fused with Hell on Wonder Under 805 has become my current favorite. Onto, I'm not going to say this right, shoji gambi paper. Someone knows how to say that better than I do, but and it was for a friend of mine was hosting an art exhibit to support a pig sanctuary. I had to do a pig, right? I mean, how could you not? So that pink book actually did get a new home. If you look at the blue book, as much as I love it, it has two problems. So this book I embroidered directly onto pre-made book cloth. I bought beautiful book cloth at Patty Grass's store, Green Heron. If you haven't been, you should go. And I pulled I guess I have it right here. Maybe I can show you. The inside, it's really, oh no, that doesn't work. See this kind of pretty picture? This little snail is kind of hidden away in here somewhere. And so I pulled him out and embroidered him on into this book cloth. And then I thought, okay, I've poked a lot of holes in this book cloth. I don't want the glue to come through. So I'm just going to cut a little circle of that that paper, and fuse that on. And so if you look, you can see, maybe I can do this we'll see if this works. Maybe I can do this can you see from the laser pointer right around there? Are you able to see the laser pointer? Yeah, right around there, there's this nice ridge that just bugs the heck out of me. And it's like, I can't give that to my friend with a ridge there. So it's still on my shelf. I also really bugs me that there's 5 bands of crosses here and 4 here, and it feels top heavy to me. So you know how we can be about some of these things. Yeah. So both lovely books, but one got a home and one I'm going to just enjoy on my shelf for a while. Now, can anybody look really closely at the fabric and tell me why this isn't a book? Do you see anything that might be a problem? Like a little dark, it's just really hard to see in this picture. So I'll cut you some slack. There's a circle like right here. And that's because while I was embroidering this lovely piece from Sachiko Morimoto's book, Stumpwork Flowers, it's a lovely book. And if you're new to stump work, it's a great book to start with because it gives you some nice dimension without getting crazy about having to work separate pieces and applique them on and all that. But at any rate, either my hands were dirty. Well, I did leave it in my hoop. So if you're embroidering something that you're going to make into a book, it's a really good idea not to leave it in the hoop overnight. Like, you're working on things over time, right? So take it out of the hoop, put it back in the next time, because you don't want that ridge. There is a website that I'm going to recommend to you where Mary Corbett of Needle and Thread had a really good blog post just a couple days ago about how to cover the edge of your thread, the edge of your hoop so that your little grubby handprints aren't getting onto your fabric. Especially important if you're working with like white ecclesiastical linen or that $40 a yard linen twill I mentioned. In this case, part of the problem is that I wasn't paying attention. I went ahead and fused it to paper before I noticed it and could have probably washed it out if I had realized, but I didn't realize till it was a little too late. So at any rate, something else for you to be aware of. Two resources really quickly I want you to know about. One is the Royal School of Needlework, or rsnstitchbank.org. If you, you will see lots of articles or references that say you only need one stitch to make beautiful work. Or here's the five stitches. They're all you need to make beautiful work. And that is absolutely true. There are people who do, Sue Stone does fabulous work with just pretty much a straight stitch. One of the most beautiful pieces I've ever seen was a poem that was written in Braille French knots. The whole piece was French knots. And it was a poem in Braille. It was just gorgeous. But, you know, you can also do beautiful work in black and white, just using black and white. But does that mean you don't want the whole color crayon box? Of course you want the whole color crayon box. Then you can decide if you're going to use lots of stitches or just one or just five. The Royal School of Needlework started a project to document every stitch in the world, which is crazy, but they're doing it. They've got about 425, 450 stitches so far. And there are 4 or 5 ways you can get into it. I encourage you to go take a look. They have done a fabulous job of documenting the stitch. So you go in, you don't need a login ID, you don't need a password. It's free for everybody. You don't have to give them any information about you. You just go to the website and there it is. And you can search by embroidery techniques, stitch uses. There's 15 ways to make leaves. There's 22 different knot stitches. You know, you can just go find something that might be, you know, some of the Elizabethan braided stitches look very much like some of the things we were seeing on those antique books we looked at, where you could have just a beautiful braided woven edge around your book. There's gorgeous pieces, and it's easy to follow step by step by step by step directions. And then you also get a little video, because sometimes you need the rhythm of it. If you're left-handed, you just click the little button and it flips it so you see what it looks like if you're left-handed. It is a very cool resource, and I think it's one that I raise money for because I really believe in it. The other one I want to mention is needleandthread.com. Mary Corbett started with a blog a long time ago. She's been doing this for a number of years now. I swear every time I'm thinking, now how do I do that? How do I set up a slate frame? I need to buy a new lamp. I wonder what lamp would be best. I can guarantee she will have a review on it. She will have an article that tells you how to do it. She has many, many, many stitch demonstrations. She just has, and then her newsletter is fun because it's like, there's some stitch alongs and there's some things that kits she sells and whatever, but it's also just a lot of, I've never seen that before. Or she will have found some online resource that's free that you just didn't know about. Lots of the things I have found my way to through her. So I really recommend that whether you're an experienced embroiderer or a new embroiderer, those are 2 websites that are really good for you to know about. Quickly, I'm going to show you 3 different artists and then we'll be at the end. Karen Barbe is a Chilean artist. She lives in Chicago now, and she embroiders on paper. If you go and search her, you'll see that she's done some really big installations that are very cool. She has sort of shifted a bit to doing much more kind of manageable, smaller projects. What you're seeing here are cards that were part of a class she did for Selvage magazine. And I use these images because I want you to be able to see what the stitches look like. And a couple things to keep in mind if you're using paper. Again, test, because you want to make sure you're using a paper that's sturdy enough. You really want to draw out your design on another piece of, you're going to make yourself a template, because once you punch the holes in your final paper, they're punched. You don't get to change anything around. So you guys are book artists, you're used to that. That's hard for embroiderers. We're used to being able to kind of fix things. So in your test, make yourself a pattern, a template. Um, Limit the amount of thread you have on the back of your piece because it'll get bumpier and bumpier. So as you are looking at the way she stitches, she really works on having her thread carry very short distances. And to me, one of the very best things is to, instead of using knots so that you end up with a knot on the back that's going to try to press into your paper, use linen tape, like the linen tape you use when you're have a mat, when you're putting a mat on a picture. So the linen tape, you just need like a little piece. You just clip it off, peel off the plaque, and then that will hold your thread in place and be perfectly flat. I thought the class was worth it just honestly for that little tip, and I've used it a lot. I also want to mention Erin Fletcher. She's taught at FOBA this last year, and I'm really kicking myself for not taking her class. I think every single person who took the class, did anybody here take her class? Just looking. I'm assuming we have some people from FOBA. Don't see anybody waving your hand, but I also can't see everybody. She is Herringbone Bindery. If you look for her online, she teaches lots and lots of classes, but I think her embroidered leather pieces are very cool. And then the last one, this is somebody I found on Facebook kind of accidentally, Journally Yours. And I kept thinking there has to be a real person with Journally Yours. I mean, Journally Yours can't just be Journally Yours. Who is this person? And I finally was able to connect with her, and her name is Ruth Rodrigo. I have to kind of repeat to myself that comparison steals joy, right? Because she started embroidering during COVID. And I really, if you're on Facebook at all, I encourage you to go find her, or Instagram or whatever. Go find her because she has pieces inside of these books that are just like this recipe book. There's a whole panel that's on super sheer fabric. So it looks like these pastries are just floating. She just does really cool things. And she does custom work, and she is out of the Philippines. And I think we just had a very delightful email interaction, and she was lovely. So I hope you'll go look at her work. And that really brings me to the end. I would say I really am not active on Instagram. I have my Instagram here because somebody is active on Instagram using Jeri Oswalt 1 with my pictures and my stuff. And it looks like it's me, but it's not me. So I just wanted you to know that if you're seeing something on Instagram, it should be just Jeri Oswalt. And someday I will get better at using it, and I will have more of my work there. But otherwise, my contact information's there. Happy to hear from all of you. And remember, embroidery is just making marks with thread. Ingar, did you have a question?
No, sorry, I thought I was applauding.
Applauding is good. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. What can I help with you? I know we're running a bit later than you usually do, but Celine, how do we move forward from here?
We have a couple of questions from the chat I'd like to go back to.
Okay.
Catherine wanted to know if you sketch your ideas out first on paper, do you draw on the fabric, or do you just go for it without any outline on the fabric?
Yeah.
Get your picture to the fabric for the embroidery.
Yeah, all of those. If I'm doing something that's just real well, okay. Usually I'm drawing something out. I am not a great drawer. I'm not a great illustrator. So I find images in lots of different ways, and I find that my stitch work looks much better than my drawings, but I usually will kind of map it out. So like the moss pieces, I was looking at the rocks in my neighborhood. I took my thread chart out to the rocks in the neighborhood. And yes, the neighbors did look at me like I was crazy, but the colors are not what you think the colors are. Like if you look at tree bark is rarely brown. If you go out and really look at what color things are, it's not always what we think. And I like having my DMC. I have a DMC fold out chart that has samples of the thread. And if you're getting a DMC embroidery thread chart, make sure you're getting one with thread, because otherwise, if it's printed in ink, it doesn't have any relationship to what color the threads actually are. So make sure you're getting one with thread, but it's really helpful. I use that a lot to get to the right colors, but then I will on paper kind of map out where things go. Like the little pig, was because I really wanted to be pig. I did actually buy, I went to Etsy and bought a download of pigs, like 3 pages of pig images that I could play around with. Since I was donating it and not making any money off of it, I didn't feel bad about doing that. The blue, this little snail, I think I just looked at the image and kind of drew my version of it. I really love having a good light board, and I use my light board a lot to transfer images onto fabric. That's a whole thing. We could spend a lot of time talking about how do you get an image onto fabric, and I'm going to refer you back to Mary Corbett on her Needle and Thread page because she has really good articles about that. But I do most often have some reference I'm going on. Like the moths, I wanted to be really accurate on, so I pulled images of actual gypsy moths and really spent time looking at those and worked from them. But, there's lots of ways to get an image that isn't necessarily drawing it, if that helps.
Okay, another question was, when is a stitch a complicated stitch and when does it become a pattern that combines stitches? So it looks like some of them were patterns that look like multiples of the same stitch or of different stitches. So when is a stitch and when is it a part of a pattern?
Well, a stitch is always a stitch. And sometimes you make a stitch like, maybe I can go back to it. Let's see. Like, for example, let's see if I can get back to it without taking forever. Like here, or maybe better yet, here. That's a good one that has lots of layers to it. So I wanted to try doing a little ribbon work. So I made these petals of ribbon. Oh, I'm sorry, you don't need to see that part of me. Yeah, I don't need to see the picture of it. I can see it on mine. So I made ribbon work petals, and then I kind of went, yeah, those don't really look that great. Let's just, how do I make that more interesting? It needs a little contrast. So then I added the purple stitches because it just needed a little oomph. And then how do I get the center to kind of stand out and be more? And so the bullion knots and the French knots kind of gave it some depth. But that's really, they're all individual stitches. It's just how I've just layered them to get the effect that I want. The thing about embroidery and why we bother with it, because sometimes it's like, well, I could draw that with a pen easier than I can make a bullion knot. Yeah, but you don't get the depth, you don't get the texture. And so embroidery is all about creating texture. It's and I believe in patterning a lot, and sometimes it is a matter of just doing one stitch over and over and over again will give you pattern. There were some the next piece, it's like these are bullion knots that make these little starfish, and it's you're just making one stitch over and over again. A bullion knot is one stitch, but yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer for that, but that's kind of my thought process.
Well,
Did that answer your question at all? Did that help? Ask the person if it answered her question.
they can pipe up.
Okay, pipe up if I wasn't clear.
While
Well,
I
I was looking at that, you had posted 2 websites on the bottom of it, and then you had a bunch of like stitches, and you were talking about how this organization was collecting all these stitches. But when you look at a lot of those stitches, they're actually looking like patterns of stitches coming together as opposed to, a French knot versus
Yes,
a straight stitch.
I understand. And part of that is because they want to show you what it looks like when you have 2 or 3 next to each other. Because typically it's unusual really to do just one stitch all by itself, right? So in this case, let me see if I have an example that's really good. Well, like a chevron stitch, that's 2 chevron stitches, but 1 chevron stitch would look weird. Yeah, they are showing you on lots of these, they're putting multiple stitches together. And if you went to look at the website, if you went and looked at their site, if you clicked and you clicked on one of those, they're going to show you how to make 1 stitch. And then you're just repeating that 1 stitch to get to pattern. And there's some kinds of embroidery that are very, well, I think many of us have done some cross stitch in our lives, right? The X is the stitch, but when you start putting them together, rows of them together, then you start to create illustrations or patterns or pictures. That's pretty common. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. This is the stitch wall is a better example. But if you go in and look, I really encourage you to go in and take a look and just click on one of them and let it, and you'll get a better sense of that.
While you have this, when you did the Karen Barbie, with
Yeah.
lines, can you go back to that picture or up to that picture?
Yes, and it's the very next one.
Oh, there you go. So
Yay.
these scissors here, what's the story with these scissors? Why do they have such big holes?
Oh, these are just scissors that she put in because they looked cool. But you know, an embroiderer, okay, you know how we have our tools that we love and we think we need many bone folders or we need many different kinds of awls of different sizes, or I know you book artists, you're not like just, I only have one tool. For embroiderers, it's all about the little scissors. And probably she just thought these looked really cool. That's probably all it is. I have lovely little black embroidery scissors. They're not quite that big a circle, but you see, they're circles. They're circles. They're not like finger holes. They're just, there's a million kind of little embroidery scissors out there, and many of them are just really pretty. And that's kind of it.
Do you
Sorry, there's nothing fancier than that.
do you still have the embroidered shoes? Your red embroidered?
Yes. Yes.
I love the little tassel hanging off the heel. That was the little.
Well, the thing with that is I base that. So the New York Times has an article on Sundays called Vows, and there was a story about a bride who they basically had two ceremonies, and one was very traditionally, she had her sari, the groom rode in on his horse. It was very much, her family was from India. It was very much their culture. And then she had the American white wedding dress on the other part of the ceremony. And it was like, well, what should her shoes look like? And brides are often standing with their back to you. So there had to be a little tassel in the back because that's what people behind her would see. So that's kind of where this started and then spun off from, and I think Diana Vreeland said that pink is the navy blue of India. And so that's kind of started the color palette, thinking about pinks. These are very orange in these pictures, and they're pretty orange, but they're not, I don't know if they're really quite that orange. I do find you have to be a little, the color, I don't know, well, this color doesn't look any better here, does it? But yeah, these little tassels, I kind of got into a tassel thing for a while where, like, I was on jury duty and it went very badly and a bad guy got off and it was really upsetting. So I had to come home and make a tassel. Just, what else could you do?
Well, thank you. Are there any more questions? I don't want to, you can stop sharing your screen.
Yes.
And
Well, one would think I could stop sharing my screen.
I'll stop the recording, maybe, hopefully.